Now can you hear me? All right. I'm glad to be with you, and I hope that our class will be edifying to you. I want to review just real briefly the chapters 13 through 19 from last Sunday morning. In these chapters, the land is divided. The promised inheritance is given. Some of the cities are identified. And that's a big question to me. I don't know. I'm curious about the names of the cities prior to Israel going in. I haven't been able to confirm all of that yet. But I'm curious about the names because the names become very significant, the names of the cities. And we're going to talk about that this evening in part of this. But then two old soldiers are rewarded for their faith. You remember who those soldiers are? Anybody? Joshua and Caleb, that's right. They're very much up in years, and they're rewarded. They're given their land. Then Shiloh becomes the headquarters. And I know that Josh dealt with this Sunday, that they had moved from Gilgal to Shiloh. And Shiloh is significant. Strong gives this word the meaning epithet of Messiah. Now think about that. A description of the Messiah. And it means tranquil, quiet, at ease. Now I know this town was here before Israel took possession. So that's curious to me that God has planned that far ahead to have a town named Shiloh where the headquarters is going to be, where the Ark of the Covenant is going to be. It means quiet and at ease. In Genesis 49, there was a blessing that Jacob is pronouncing on his sons. And the one to Judah includes Shiloh being named as a descendant of Judah. And we know who that is. It's Jesus Christ. And so it's really a setup for what Jesus represents to us. And as Josh told us Sunday, the tabernacle is set up there. And it's there for several hundred years until the time of David. It was later destroyed by God in the wilderness for its wickedness by the Philistines. The Philistines came in, you may remember, and what did they take when they left? After destroying Shiloh, what did they take? The Ark of the Covenant. That's right. The Philistines, and remember they got in trouble with that, but they wish they hadn't taken it. That's right. Remember how they sent it back to Israel? Anybody remember that? They put it on a cart pulled by an oxen and hoping that cart was going to go all the way back to Israel, and it did. But anyway, so now it's time for them to live in the promised land. They've had a long time that this being promised. And so we're looking at Joshua 20 through 22 tonight to deal with that. Let's, I want that later. I'm sorry. Let's, I want to read from Joshua 20. If you want to follow along, Joshua 20, verses 1 through 6. Then the Lord said to Joshua, say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. They shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city and give him a place and he shall remain there with them. If the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly, or unwittingly, some of your versions say, and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is high priest at the time. Then the manslayer may return to his own town and his own home, to the town from which he fled. Now these 6 verses become significant as we look at words that are being used in other texts to describe these cities and what purpose they're going to serve, what's going to happen in these cities. Look at Joshua 20, the first 2 verses, and think about, and we just read, but just think about how they arrived at this information. It came from Jehovah first, then to Moses, then to Joshua, and now to Israel. They were to set apart, and this word simply means a designated purpose or a function, as light versus clean versus unclean. So set apart these cities. Exodus 6:16, give Levites 48 cities, no land, but give them 48 cities. Each tribe proportionate to the size of the tribe. So the larger tribes were to give more cities than the smaller tribes. That's in Numbers 35. But 6 cities of refuge for a killer. Now, let's look at this. You may think my title is wrong, and I can deal with that, but I'm calling this Jehovah's Protection for Killers. And I see an apparent progression here. In Genesis 4, you know about Cain and his killing his brother. He said to the Lord, my what's the word I want? My punishment is too difficult. It's what? Greater than I can bear. So what did the Lord do for him? Here's a killer. And this is a man who intended to kill. This isn't in ignorance or unwittingly. He intended to kill. And what does the Lord do for him? He puts a mark on him. So if anybody tries to kill you, then their blood will be shed because they killed you. But he's an impenitent killer. But nonetheless, God preserves his life. Kind of interesting. Then in Genesis 9, you may remember after the flood, God made a covenant with Noah in the death of killers. The death for killers. It was blood for blood. You take a man's life, your blood will be shed. You shed his blood, your blood is going to be shed. So it was blood for blood. And then, I'm sorry. Eye for an eye. Yes. Exodus 21. Now it's a little bit different. There's shelter at the altar horns. Now, I'm only I didn't find any place where Moses said, this shall be. But I find that when there are people at the horns of the altar, they can either be taken and killed or killed on the spot, or they can be removed and forgiven. Anyway, that was the third one. And now, as we get into Joshua, there's safety in one of 6 cities for accidental killers. So I see a progression there. You may choose to differ with me, and that's fine, but a progression from the very beginning of time. In verse 6, note what's going to happen with this man. And I'm taking this text from Exodus 35 this time. There's 4 different words that are used in Exodus 35. And they're the first one is governance. As you read that passage, there was governance, there was verdict, there was deliverance and restoration. And it seems in the text that the governance was by the priests. How was that going to be so? What was this city designed for? Who was supposed to be living in this city of refuge? Who? The priests. The priests. So the priests then seem to be in a position of governing what's going on. I couldn't help but think of the church and the royal priesthood that we're to be today. But secondly, there's the word verdict, and that was to be made, a decision made by the congregation. The congregation would make the judgment. Now, how that was made, I'm not sure. But I suppose at some point they would go to the place where this murder had taken place, and there was some investigation, and then a judgment is made by the congregation. But I thought it was interesting, the congregation makes the judgment. It's not the elders of the city, it's not the priests, it's the congregation of that city. And that reminds me of Paul's statement to the church in Corinth, that surely there's somebody among you that can make these judgments. You don't have to go to the people of the world for your judgments. Then thirdly, deliverance and restoration. This was by the elders. First of all, when the manslayer came to the city, he would present his case to whom? To whom? We just read it in Joshua 20. To the elders of the city. And they would listen to his case and take him in. So there's the deliverance. And then secondly, at the end of the freedom that he has after the death of the high priest, they were instructed to restore him to his home. So there's safety all the way around for the accidental killer. The one who is not accidental, that's another story, and you know the story there.
You wouldn't call that murder, would you? If it was an accidental kill. Murder.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you. Very good. Okay, Joshua 20 now, again. Let's read 7 and 8 of that chapter. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country, and Naphtali, and Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. And beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho, they appointed Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland from the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. These were the cities designated for all the people of Israel and for the stranger sojourning among them, that anyone who killed a person without intent could flee there, so that he might not die by the hand of the avenger of blood, till he stood before the congregation. So the congregation again is being highlighted by Joshua as making the judgment, and he's to stay there. He's to be having safety while he's there. Now look at where these are located. I don't know if you can see these or not, but I hope the arrows will help you. Kadesh up in the far north, Shechem in the middle, Hebron down at the bottom, Bezer on the right side, Ramoth, and then Golan. And notice the location of these cities. These were located, and if you can look at your chart there for miles, you can see there's not very many miles that you would have to to go to arrive at one of these cities from any place in the nation, and that was intended. That was God's plan. Some have said it only took a half day to get to any one of these. Some said it took no more than one day. So traveling the way they did, they could arrive at one of these cities of refuge in short order. And that was fully intended by the Lord. But also, what am I doing here? Okay, I moved it too far. I wanted you to see on the west side, Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron, and Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan. And they were strategically located. That's what I was talking to you about. Let's go back to that now. They're strategically located in the, some of them are specified, they were in the mountains. We're going to talk about those. And there was access within a short period of time. Significance of these names, and that's where it really boggles my mind that God can plan so far ahead, and these cities were there. These names were there. Apparently God knew about that. He knew the purpose for which these cities were going to be used, and he had planned that far beyond any man's thought. Kadesh, a holy place, righteousness. I'll just read through those real quickly and then go back and talk about them. Shechem, a strong shoulder. Hebron, or Kirjath Arba, fellowship. Bezer, stronghold, fortress, fortified place. Ramoth, exalted or high place. Golan, joy, enclosure for captives, exaltation. I've got scriptures, and I'd be glad to share these with you if you want them. I didn't put them on the screen, but for Kadesh, think about this now. As we're thinking about a holy place, in New Jerusalem is righteousness, the ultimate refuge for the unclean and the unholy. This is in Galilee, in the mountains of Naphtali. Shechem, strong shoulder. Remember that it was predicted the government was going to be on his shoulders. Our strength and our strong consolation of hope. He's our refuge. That's in the mountains of Ephraim. And then Hebron. Fellowship. Sinners have fellowship with Christ and the Father through Jesus Christ. So there's no more loneliness. That's in the mountains of Judah. Bezer, a stronghold, a fortress, fortified place. In Christ, life is hidden. God is a fortress, a trust for the hopeless and helpless sinner. That's in the wilderness of the plain of Reuben. Ramoth, exalted and high place. Christ made wretched, hopeless sinners to sit where? In the heavenly places. So, in an exalted place, sinners like you and me can sit in the heavenlies, above the world. That's in Gilead of Gad. Golan, joy and closure for captives. In Jesus is joy. Downcast have refuge and are captive to Christ on high. That's in Bashan of Manasseh. Any comments or questions? I'm just going to keep going here if you don't have anything. These are appropriately named, number one, for their purpose. They served a purpose that God wanted for his children. Those who made a mistake, they could have refuge in one of these cities. But secondly, they foreshadow Christ, as I've already pointed out in the definitions. And Jesus is our only refuge. as the scapegoat took away sin, and that was incomplete, taking away of sin, so these 6 refuge cities are also incomplete. For the time, it gave them hope because they knew something new was coming, something else down the line, long time off was coming. Jesus is 7. Think about the contrast there between 6 and 7. Jesus is 7. Jesus is the perfect refuge. Comments or questions? Excuse me?
It's interesting that one of these cities is Shechem, and that the Levites would have Shechem because of the past history of Levi and Simeon seeking revenge against the people of Shechem.
Yes.
It's going in exactly the opposite direction.
Many years later, unfortunately. Yep. Good point. Let me read now from Joshua 21, the first 4 verses. Then the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites came to Eleazar the priest, and to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the people of Israel. And they said to them at Shiloh, that's where the headquarters was, remember? They said to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, the Lord commanded through Moses that we be given cities to dwell in, along with their pasture lands for our livestock. So by the command of the Lord, the people of Israel gave to the Levites the following cities and pasture lands out of their inheritance. So each of these tribes is giving to the Levites towns, cities, no land, except, somebody correct me, I think it was 2,000 cubits all the way around. Does anybody know? I forgot to.
James Version says suburbs.
I'm sorry?
King James Version says suburbs.
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 Yes.
Just a little extra.
Yeah.
Because they've given them.
I think it was specified how wide a circle was being made. I think it was something like 2,000 cubits all the way around the city. And that was for their pasture land. Three sons of Levi are the heirs of these cities. I've listed them first, second, and third. You can see that. But I put them in the order that Joshua has them here in our text. In the 4th verse, Kohath is a descendant of Aaron, and somebody mentioned a little bit ago that was the priestly tribe, and that's right. And they had 13 cities. And then the rest of the Kohathites, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, had 10 more cities. So there are 23 cities for the Kohathites, for Kohath. And for Gershon, there were 13 cities. He was the first son, but he received only 13 cities. The third son, Merari, 12 cities. 48 cities total. Back to our map to look at these locations on each side. Consider what these verses are saying now as you look at these locations. The Kohathites, in verse 4, the lot came out for the clans of the Kohathites. So those Levites who were descendants of Aaron, the priest, received by lot from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. There's where the priestly tribes were. The ones who were most often involved in what was going on in the temple. 13 cities. But they had the three, or the 2 cities there also with city of refuge. But then the rest of the Kohathites in verse 5, the rest of the Kohathites received by lot from the clans of the tribe of Ephraim, Dan, and Manasseh, 10 cities. Now, these were not as involved as the first group of Kohathites, but they were all very special people in the priesthood. 23 cities total with their pasture lands. Only the Kohathites were priests. I want us to keep that in mind because of the location. You're going to see the significance of that. They're close enough to what city that makes that significant. Jerusalem. Again, stop and think about this. This is several hundred years before the Ark of the Covenant is moved to Jerusalem. Tell me that's not planning by God. Jerusalem becomes a very important city, and it was right in the center of where these Kohathites were living. So they had easy access to the city for their work. They were responsible for the ark, the table of showbread, the candlestick, the altars, the vessels, and they carried all that on foot. The ark was moved there later by David in 2 Samuel 6. Under the United Kingdom, they were also prominent for songs or psalms as we know them, for the music. And again, all of that was planned by Jehovah God. Verse 6, the Gershonites received by lot from the clans of the tribe of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Manasseh, way up in the north. And their duties, there are 13 cities, their duties were the tabernacle, the tent, screens for the doors, all the hangings and cords. And then the Merarites in verse 7, according to their clans, received from the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun, 12 cities. They received the least number, but they had important duties. They were charged for the boards, the bars of the tabernacle, the pillars, the pegs, the sockets, and the utensils. Any comments or questions? So, 48 cities. The Kohathites, 23 cities. As we read through the rest of the chapter, this is what we're going to see. Verses 20 through 26 for the Kohathites, and all the cities are named there. The Gershonites in verses 27 through 33, 13 cities. All of them are named. The Merarites, 34 through 40, 12 cities. And it included all the common land that surrounded the city. I'm saying again, I recall it was 2,000 cubits around the city. And these 48 cities belong to the Levites. Now, we find other places where it wasn't just Levites who lived in the city. I didn't write this down, but I know David lived in one of these cities at one point when he was on the run. And other people did too. But other people lived there, but they still belonged to the Levites. The Levites who lived there received tithes. They received the first fruits, the holy things for their service. And I want you to notice again, as we look at our map, let me go back to that if I can find it real quickly. Oh, there it is. As we go to our map, look where they're located and see how strung out they are. They were dispersed in these cities all around the nation. Why do you suppose? Why were these priests all over Palestine?
They were supposed to be teaching children.
Good. Very good. That's exactly right. That was their responsibility. Remember when Naaman came to Jesus by night? And Jesus, I was puzzled by this for many years. Why was Jesus so hard on him in saying, "You're a teacher of Israel, and you don't know these things? He was talking specifically about the Spirit. But they were the teachers. They were the examples. They were the ones who would instruct and edify the people. They were the ones that dished out the punishment, remember, for the accidental killer. They were the lead in devotion and obedience and true worship to Jehovah. So they had their responsibilities. Any comments there? Questions? The end of chapter 21 reads this way. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers. And they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them. For the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Very specific language. Anybody misunderstand that? What do you take out of that? What do you see Joshua saying here?
Remember that the Lord keeps his promises.
He does. Definitely does. You know, many years ago, I was studying with a man. We had a real good study until we came to this passage. And he was a hardcore believer, as a lot of our congressmen are, that Israel never received their land. And we need to show partiality to Israel today so that they can have their land back. They can have Jerusalem back. They never got it. And he firmly believed that. They had never gotten it. We came to this verse, and I read it, and I said, now, what do you think of this? He said, well, I think I'm going to have to tear this page out of my Bible. And he was dead serious. He had never seen the verse before in his life, and he was dead serious. I think I'm going to have to tear this page out of my Bible. Why? It doesn't agree with my philosophy. It doesn't agree with what I think or what I believe. But it was clear to him also, as it is to you and me, and as it was to the people of Joshua's day. They knew the Lord had kept his promise. They knew they had received the land. And Joshua is making that very clear at this point. We'll go into chapter 21. This is after the conquest. And the first 7 verses there, Israel's gathered at Shiloh. And that's where, remember, that's where the Ark of the Covenant is. And Joshua commends the 2.5 tribes from the east side because they came across the river, remember? They came across the river and helped all the other tribes claim their territory because they'd all worked together on the east side. So Joshua commends them for their leaving their families behind, going across the river, and helping subdue these people and take this land. But he also blesses them. And he sends them away in verse 9. He says, go back to your tents with much wealth. Look at these words. Go back to your tents with much wealth, with very much livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, iron, with much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brethren. Do you think they were the only tribes that came away with all this livestock and silver and gold and bronze and clothing? Or do you think all the tribes had the same thing? They all did. When they took a land, they took a place, the bounty was theirs unless God had prohibited it. So all of them had taken this, but now he's telling these 2.5 tribes, go back across Jordan and share that with your brethren. Now, I'm calling these Reuben, Gath, and Manasseh RGM. These tribes pause at Jordan on their way back. If you follow along, we'll talk about this in verse 10. They built an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size. Verse 11, Israel heard of it, gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. Just think of the progression here. They sent Phinehas and 10 chiefs to inquire. Commend that, can't you? Verse 16, they asked the 2.5 tribes, what is this breach of faith against the God of Israel? Why are you rebelling? And verse 17 through 20, they explain why they're making these accusations. They say, well, wasn't the sin of Peor and the sin of Achan, and the lessons we learned there, wasn't that enough? The whole congregation suffered because of the sins of those people. Wasn't that enough? Didn't you learn enough from that? Is that the reason you built this altar? Well, then Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh have this response in verse 22. The mighty one, God Jehovah, he knows, and Israel will know. If it was in rebellion to Jehovah, do not spare us. If you find that we are in rebellion to Jehovah God, then don't spare us. But here's the thing. They said, when our children ask what those people are doing on the other side of Jordan, what do they have to do with us? And you could see that could probably happen, that the Jordan would be a boundary. And so way across the Jordan, what do those people have to do with us? Well, they're answering. They said, if the altar was the altar is a witness, it's a reminder. In other words, it's not for offering sacrifice. See, that's what they had thought. They had thought that it was for offering sacrifice. So Israel and Phinehas agree. They concede their point, and they said, this altar is a witness. It's not for sacrifice. Good. I think it's interesting in verse 30, the statement that they make. You have delivered the people from the hand of Jehovah. You suppose that could have been done before now? I want you to look at what has happened here. What has been recorded. They built an altar by the Jordan. Israel heard of it. The first thing came to my mind is hearsay. They heard of it, and they gathered together for what? For war. You ever hear such a thing among brethren? They gathered for war. But they sent Phinehas and the 10 chiefs to inquire. I thought that was commendable. But they ask, why this breach of faith? Why are you rebelling? Was it enough that we suffered for the sins of Peor and Achan? Then they answer, the mighty one, Jehovah knows, and Israel will know. I think that's a very positive attitude on their part. Think how they respond to these accusations that are completely false. Think how these 3 tribes respond to that. Think of the disposition they had to respond this way. Then,
It reminds us when they crossed the Jordan to occupy the land, they took large stones out
that's right.
and they said, why are you doing this?
Great comparison.
So that we can tell our children
That's right. And it's commendable on the part of the Reubenites and the Gadites and the Manassites that they would put up a memorial to remind everybody, including themselves. This was the reason. We are one. We're under the mighty God, Jehovah. Now for discussion for the next few minutes. We don't have very much, but I want you to think about these things. Shouldn't we highly value Jehovah's will? Absolutely. Number two, shouldn't we avoid our good being called evil if we can? If we can. I mean, they were up to good, but somebody called it evil. Without investigating first, they called evil and prepare for war. What a disposition, huh? What an attitude. But it reminds me of the fact that we have personal choices that we can make, and we need to be very careful if we can, at all possible, live at peace with others, do that. But we shouldn't think it strange when we are accused. Watch our disposition for rash judgments. Do you think their judgment was rash? I do. I think it was very rash. But they assumed, without investigating, what these three tribes had done and accused them falsely. What did Jesus say about judging by appearance? Anybody recall? That's right. Judge not by appearance, but with righteous judgment. And Jesus made a statement, I don't judge. In that context, he doesn't judge by appearance. He doesn't look at Jay and say, I don't like you because you wear suspenders. Jesus doesn't judge by appearance. And we need to learn that lesson ourselves. That's where these people across the river made the mistake. It was an appearance that they misjudged. They misunderstood what it looked like to them. And also be grateful for the conscience that we can have before God. Did these three tribes, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, have a good conscience? I'm sure they did. They thought they were doing good. And then to be falsely accused. They had a good conscience before God, and I'm sure they were grateful for that.
Good attitude even when they were charged.
That's right. And that's the other.
It kept them from stirring up a little.
That's a great point. They didn't retort in ugly words. They didn't treat these brethren ugly. Very kindly. This is what we did. And then I'm suggesting that we need to speak and serve kindly and lovingly. Instead of ridiculing somebody, instead of putting them down, misrepresenting them as these tribes did, treat them lovingly and kindly. And finally, dread sin more than suffering wrongfully. I'm sure those tribes on the eastern side were dreadful of sin. I'm sure they were. And they were willing to suffer wrongfully, and did, because their brethren falsely accused them. What comments do you have? What questions do you have? I know we're out of time, but...
About 5 minutes before they
Oh, we have 5. Oh, we're not out of time. Thank you. I asked the question down at the bottom, how will all know we are Jesus' disciples? Excuse me? That's right. Was there love on the part of the 10 tribes on the western side? You see any love in what they did? But the 3, I'm sorry.
They assumed they were right, and
Yeah, I know. If they had loved the tribes on the other side, wouldn't they have gone to investigate before they made a judgment? The world will know us by how we love each other. And that doesn't mean overlooking something that we do that's wrong, but how we love each other, how we treat each other in those times. Thank you for your time.